as a teen, but should never watch again. Number 9. American Pie 2. The first American Pie film, while by no means being a comedy masterclass, was a landmark moment in film. It updated the sexually frustrated high school comedy for the 21st century and had enough iconic lines, scenes, and characters to cement itself as a classic. The sequel, on the other hand, was essentially the first of many bile-filled regurgitations of the American Pie formula. It did nothing new, bundling all the characters into a single location and then just had a here we go again sort of atmosphere. But this kind of repetition is exactly what an adolescent you wanted. Your thinking wasn't, this is just a cheap repetition of a no longer fresh formula, but awesome, it's just like the first one and even more stupid and possibly with even more outrageous or sexy scenes. Either way, upon return viewing, there's little to offer over the original. Number 8. The Craft. If American Pie was the outlet for the fantasies of the adolescent virgin male, then The Craft was the equivalent for girls of the same age. While American Pie was all about crassly reaching under the skirts of the opposite sex, The Craft was, at its core, about female camaraderie. A quartet of oddball outsiders who become the tyrannical queens of the high school. The lead quartet of characters wasn't popular or conventionally beautiful. They were weirdos who commanded respect, making them the ultimate power fantasy for any teenage girl who wasn't the cheerleader or captain of the netball team. Going back now, though, it's aged poorly, with the acting being much more stilted and emo than you might first remember. It's still enjoyable as a campy flick, but its power has dwindled quite a bit. Number 7. The Waterboy. Okay, so I loved The Waterboy, and I watched it recently, and it's still... it's okay. It's not great, but just okay. But you know what's ruined the overall experience of the film? Adam Sandler. Back then, this guy was the shit. He was popular and full of energy in his roles, but over the years he's become fat and lazy with his films, basically using them as excuses to bring his friends on holiday and shill some shitty products. Going back to watch any of his early work is now marred by just how shoddy a comedian he is today, and this seems to be the turning point. Number 6. She's All That. Perhaps the most fondly remembered 90s teen flick that relied on the ugly duckling trope, She's All That was a high school fairy tale, wholesome to the point of sickliness. The premise sees forgotten 90s heartthrob Freddie Prinze Jr. take on a bet that he can turn artsy, nerdy Rachel Lee Cook into a prom queen within a matter of weeks. Watched as a teen, the film was a sweet tale of how even an unremarkable girl can get the school stud if she tries hard enough. But there's a much more troublesome message under it all watching it as an adult. Sure, Prinze Jr. falls for the nerd, but only at the point where she no longer looks like one. The more physically attractive Cook gets as the film progresses, the more Prince falls in love with her, leaving us with the message that if the girl wants to get her guy, she can be herself, but only on the inside. As outside, she better slap on some makeup, take off those glasses, and shorten that dress. Number 5. Hackers. Hackers, which saw sexy cyber geeks Angelina Jolie and Johnny Lee Miller harness their hacking skills to save the world, was one of the first films to empower teenagers with modern technology. It depicted the computer geek as a rebel, a hero in the new age, where the keyboard is mightier than the gun, and was probably a major part of Anonymous's inspiration. Sadly, it's a film very much of its era, and the 90s-ness means that Hackers has not aged well. Even a teen watching it today would laugh at all the verbiage and action cuts as the heroes type into something less complicated than MS Word. Number 4. Jane Austen's Mafia. Jim Abrams did some great work in the 80s and 90s, delivering slapstick comedies like Hot Shots, Airplane, and the Naked Gun films, which have become emblematic of comedies from those eras. Surely a similarly styled spoof of mafia movies reflecting on the great gangster flicks of the previous 2 decades was a recipe for success. Well, for a naive young teen, it was. You could happily overlook all of the hollow, poorly punned references to legendary crime films and just laugh hysterically at the vomiting gags, kids getting shoved up donkeys' asses, and the slapstick of slipping on a banana peel then flying through the air variety. Mafia's humor lacks the sharpness of previous Abrams films, and is just so weak when compared to its earlier brethren. It's less a case of, don't watch this, and more a case of, why would you even bother when better has already been done? Number 3. The Beach. I was so adamant that Leonardo DiCaprio should have won an award for this coming-of-age story when I was younger, desperately saying to anyone who would listen that it's a supremely important piece of film. When I watched this about 2 months ago, however, I was much quieter. It's still a great film, but I no longer feel the urge to go backpacking and steal kisses from a gorgeous French girl, mainly because I'd done that the week prior, but also because the adult cynicism in me had now taken hold of my life. The film now represents a bunch of entitled wankers pissing about on a private beach and getting moody about it. The majority of the cast are unlikable, and the passionate speeches about love and humanity seem like a Tumblr post, which sucks because I love this film. hate what I've become. Number 2, murder by numbers. We've all wondered how to commit the perfect murder, haven't we? Right? No? Just me? Oh, bollocks, that's probably put me on some sort of danger list now. Well, Murder by Numbers turns this question into a movie, with Sandra Bullock playing a cop attempting to prove that a young Ryan Gosling and Michael Pitt are responsible for a seemingly perfect, untraceable crime. It struck a chord with teens because it played on the bad boy fantasy. Adolescent brats like me have always wanted to prove that they are more clever than the adults around them, and Murder by Numbers took that one-upmanship to the absolute limit. But when you're watching it back, you realise that it's so simple and clearly aimed at the aforementioned brat demographic. I say that because when you boil it down, the film is nowhere near as clever as it thinks it is, or for that matter, as clever as you remember it. And number 1, Cruel Intentions. Cruel Intentions sees step-siblings take a bet on whether or not they can get Reese Witherspoon, who's holding out for true love, in between the sheets. Cue 2 hours of superficial slickness that had a generation of boys wishing they could leap through the screens and just grab whatever was going on. The film was probably so appealing at the time because it was sexy in the most adolescent of ways, teasing us with cleavage shots, an insipid sex scene, and the infamous stringy lesbian kiss between Selma Blair and Geller. But upon returning, it just seems so silly. Dressing in black doesn't make you come across like a modern-day Casanova. In fact, it makes you look like some scene kid whose parents should be very worried. And the sexiness just seems so tame that it barely even registers on the scandal scale anymore. This one is probably best just left in your memory banks.